The air smells of cordite, wet earth, and fear. Mud clings to the gray-green wool of their uniforms. It cakes their faces, a mask of exhaustion and defeat. These are the women of the Third Reich. The Helferinnen, auxiliaries, radio operators, clerks, anti-aircraft assistants, cogs in a war machine that has just ground to a halt. Around them, the American GIs move with a casual authority. Their uniforms are clean, their faces are well fed, their victory is absolute. For the German women, the script they have memorized is about to begin. A story of vengeance, of humiliation, of a price to be paid. Their own propaganda promised them monsters. If you believe history holds 1,000 hidden stories, subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. The journey is a descent into darkness. First, a canvas-topped truck that jolts over ruined roads. Then, a holding pen in France, a world of mud and barbed wire. Finally, a transport ship. A vast, groaning metal belly that swallows them whole. For weeks, this steel womb is their universe. They are surrounded by the smell of diesel, sweat, and salt water. The rhythmic thrum of the engine is a constant heartbeat counting down to an unknown fate. Whispers fill the darkness. Stories of what happens to captured women. Stories their officers told them. Stories that now feel terribly real. Every echo of a guard's boot in the corridor is a thunderclap of dread. But the door only opens for the clatter of metal food trays. The commands are gruff, impossible to understand. They are nothing more than cargo. The first light is a shock. It streams into the hold, painfully bright. They are herded onto a pier. The air tastes different, clean. The world around them is whole. No rubble, no skeletons of bombed-out buildings. They board a train, and the journey becomes a tour through a phantom land. They see towns with neat houses, shops with unbroken windows, children playing on green lawns. This alien landscape of peace only sharpens their fear. A country untouched by war has no reason to show mercy. The sign on the gate reads Camp Forest, Tennessee. It looks exactly as they imagined. The barbed wire fences, the tall watchtowers, the grim-faced guards. This is it. The script is finally playing out. They are stripped of their belongings, their uniforms taken away. Their names are replaced with a number on a tag. They are led, naked and shivering, into a large concrete building thick with steam. A shower house. Hannah, a 19-year-old signals assistant, braces herself. She expects the icy, punishing spray of a delousing station. A final humiliation. The hiss of the pipes is loud. A dozen shower heads roar to life, and the water that hits her skin is not cold. It is blissfully, impossibly hot. She squeezes her eyes shut, then opens them in disbelief. The grime of the front lines, the filth of the journey, it all washes away. A guard hands her a bar of soap. It is white. It smells of flowers, not the harsh lye soap of wartime. This simple comfort is a profound act of something. Something other than cruelty. Hot water is a ghost from a life before the war. To be given it by her enemy is a deeply confusing sensation. Fear mixes with a new, unsettling emotion, bewilderment. The second shock comes an hour later. In the mess hall, they sit at long wooden tables. A metal tray is placed in front of each woman. Hannah stares at hers. She expected watery turnip soup, a crust of stale bread. Instead, she sees a scoop of scrambled eggs, 2 strips of fried bacon, and a thick slice of unnaturally white bread. And in a mug, a dark liquid steams. She lifts it to her lips. The aroma is rich, powerful, real coffee, not the bitter ersatz brew of roasted acorn she has been drinking for years. Around her, the other women are silent. Some eat mechanically. Others just stare at the food. This is not the behavior of monsters. Monsters do not waste hot water, bacon, and real coffee on their prisoners. This is something else, something calculated, disorienting. This is not about breaking their bodies. It feels like it is about something far more complicated. The days settled into a strange rhythm, a life governed by bells and schedules. Roll call at dawn, meals at 7, 12, and 5. The initial terror was gone, replaced by a new, gnawing enemy. Monotony. The Geneva Convention of 1929, a document none of them had ever read, stipulated that prisoners of war must be treated humanely, a detail conveniently omitted from their own propaganda. It also stipulated that enlisted prisoners could be put to work. The American camp commanders had a problem. They were overseeing a vast logistical operation with a shortage of clerical staff. And in front of them were hundreds of German women, educated, disciplined, trained in administration and communications. They were the solution. Hannah was called into an office. She stood stiffly before a tired-looking captain. She expected an interrogation. Questions about troop movements, military secrets. The captain looked at her file. He asked, through a translator, if she knew how to type. He explained the quartermaster's office needed help. Inventory, requisitions, supply logs. It was the same work she had done for the Wehrmacht. But now she would be counting American blankets instead of German radio batteries. So began the most surreal chapter of her life. A prisoner of war who was also an office assistant. Her new battlefield was a war against inefficiency. Her weapon was an Underwood typewriter. The work was a shield. It protected her from the crushing boredom, from the anxiety of an unknown future. But it also plunged her into the heart of the American war machine's astonishing abundance. She typed lists of things she had not seen in years. Canned peaches, canned beef, cases of chocolate bars by the thousand. The numbers were astronomical. A Red Cross report from 1944 noted that the average American GI consumed over 4,000 calories a day. Back home, Hannah's family was lucky to get a third of that, much of it from turnips and sawdust bread. One afternoon, a guard pried open a crate. It was full of jars containing a thick, brown paste. Peanut butter, he called it. He offered her a spoonful on a cracker. It was sticky, salty and sweet at the same time, an alien taste. The guard, a boy from Ohio no older than her, ate it without a care. He talked about something called baseball. The crackle of a game sometimes drifted from a radio in the office. It was another layer of the psychological war. Not terror, but a relentless, overwhelming exposure to normalcy. If you are surprised by where this story is going, hit the subscribe button. You are not just supporting our channel, you are helping us uncover more hidden histories like this one. On Saturday nights, they showed movies in the mess hall, Hollywood musicals, explosions of impossible color and glamour, happy endings that felt like a cruel joke. One guard, Sergeant Miller, would sometimes bring them small, curved bottles on hot afternoons. Coca-Cola. The fizz, the shocking sweetness, was another piece of this bizarre new reality. A reality where her enemy showed her more casual kindness than some of her own officers ever had. But this strange mercy created a new conflict, not with the guards, but within themselves. In the barracks, the women divided. Some saw cooperation as survival. Others saw it as treason. The true believers, the ones who still clung to the phantom of the Reich, would whisper insults in the laundry line. Traitor. Collaborator. They accused women like Hannah of selling their honor for a warm bed and American chocolate. Hannah lay awake at night wrestling with the paradox. Was she surviving, or was she surrendering? She had pledged an oath to a nation that was now a ghost. Her leaders had promised her glory and delivered her to a cage. A comfortable, humane cage, but a cage nonetheless. The homeland that demanded her honor had treated its own people with unimaginable cruelty. The enemy, who demanded only her compliance, treated her with a detached, bureaucratic decency. Letters from home, when they arrived, were heavily censored strips of paper. But the words that got through painted a grim picture. Hunger, chaos, cities that no longer existed. Her family was in a free Germany, and they were starving. She was in an enemy prison, and she had gained 5 pounds. She was a captive. And for the first time, she felt a terrifying, shameful thought take root in her mind. She was safer here than they were at home. The news arrived in May of 1945, not with a formal announcement, but in the small details. The guards smiled more. A radio in the administration building played jaunty, triumphant music. The war in Europe was over. A wave of profound, complicated silence fell over the women's barracks. It was not the silence of joy. It was the silence of a final, irreversible verdict. Relief was a part of it, a loosening of a knot that had been tight in their chests for years. The killing was done. But shame was there too, a deep, cold shame of utter defeat. And under it all, a new and sharper fear. What happens now? What becomes of the vanquished when the war is over? The Americans' answer was not repatriation, not yet. Their answer was education. A denazification program, they called it. It began with lectures. An officer would stand before them with charts and graphs. He spoke of industrial production. In 1944, the United States had produced over 96,000 military aircraft. Germany had produced less than 40,000. America had built over 300,000 trucks. Germany less than a fifth of that. The numbers were a cold, hard autopsy of their defeat. They had not lost a war of spirit or will. They had lost a war of factories and steel. The officer's voice was matter-of-fact, not gloating. He was simply stating the arithmetic of their annihilation. The true lesson, however, was not delivered with charts. It was delivered with light and shadow. One evening, they were all ordered into the mess hall. A 16mm film projector was set up at the back of the room. The lights went out. The whir of the machine filled the silence. The first images flickered onto the makeshift screen. They were from the liberation of a place called Buchenwald. Then another, called Bergen-Belsen. In the dark, Hannah saw it. The walking skeletons in striped pajamas, the vacant, hollow eyes, the bulldozers pushing mountains of emaciated bodies into open pits. The film was silent, but the room was filled with sound. A gasp, a choked sob, the sharp intake of breath from 100 women at once. This was not propaganda. This was not some allied trick. The gaunt faces, the piles of shoes, the ovens. The horror was undeniable. It was a truth so absolute it felt like a physical blow. Hannah's mind fractured. The propaganda had been a lie, but not in the way she had ever imagined. The monsters were real. They had not been waiting for her in America. They had been the ones in Berlin, in Munich, in the fine offices where they had signed her orders. The men she had been taught to revere had built this. This industrial-scale nightmare. The honor she had worried so much about. The oath she had pledged. It was an allegiance to this. To a death cult. The lights came back on. No one spoke. No one moved. The American guards stood by the doors, their faces grim, unreadable. They just watched. In the days that followed, the camp became a place of ghosts. The strange, monotonous peace was shattered. Some women retreated into a hard, defiant denial. Lies, they whispered. All lies. But most were broken. The truth was a poison that worked its way through their souls. A woman who had been a nurse slit her wrists in the washroom. She was found in time. Another refused to eat, wasting away on her cot until she was taken to the infirmary. Despair was a sickness, and it was spreading faster than any fever. Letters from home became instruments of torture. The censors, black ink, could not hide the devastation. A letter for Hannah finally arrived from her mother in Dresden. The city was gone, wiped from the earth. Her father was missing. Her younger brother was foraging for food in the rubble. They were living on boiled nettles. They were free, and they were starving. Hannah read the words while sitting on her cot, a full meal of beef stew and potatoes heavy in her stomach. The shame was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. She was a prisoner, and she was safe. She was a captive, and she was privileged. This was the ultimate cruelty. Not the barbed wire, but the knowledge that her cage was a sanctuary. Survival was no longer a question of enduring captivity. It was a question of enduring the truth. The choice was stark. To crumble under the weight of it all, or to find a reason to keep breathing. For Hannah, the reason became a single, desperate hope. Her family. The thought of her brother picking through ruins for a scrap of bread. She had to get back. She had to help. The dignity she would find was not in a dead ideology, but in the simple, brutal act of enduring, of living, so she could one day go home and rebuild something from the ashes. One morning in late autumn, they were assembled for roll call. The camp commandant stood before them, a sheaf of papers in his hand. Through his translator, he made the announcement. An agreement had been reached. Repatriation was to begin. In phases, over the next several months, they would all be sent home. A murmur went through the crowd. But again, it was not the sound of pure joy. It was the sound of 1,000 new fears taking flight. Home. The word itself was a question mark. They were being released from their cage of kindness, only to be sent into a wasteland they no longer recognized. Hannah looked at the faces around her, the hard faces of the believers, the broken faces of the disillusioned. And she wondered which was worse, to be a prisoner of your enemy, or to be a stranger in your own land. The journey home was the inverse of the one that had brought them. They were no longer soldiers of a fallen empire, but simply women returning to a continent of ghosts. When Hannah finally stepped back onto German soil, the smell was not of home, but of dust, decay, and ashes. The port city was a jagged silhouette against the gray sky. Skeletons of buildings clawed at the clouds. There was no bustling crowd to greet the ship, only the silence of a graveyard. The women who had been prisoners in America returned to a different kind of prison, a nation shattered by guilt and devastation. They had been spared the worst of the war's end, only to be delivered into its bleakest aftermath. For the rest of her life, Hannah would rarely speak of her time as a prisoner. It was a strange, liminal space that no one else could understand. How could she explain the terror of capture, followed by the baffling relief of a hot shower? How could she describe the shame of working for the enemy, and the deeper shame of discovering who the real enemy truly was? Her family, when she finally found them, had survived, but they were thin, hollowed-out versions of the people she remembered. They looked at her, well-fed and clean, with a mixture of relief and a quiet, unbridgeable distance. She had been a captive, but she had not suffered as they had. War is meant to teach lessons of hatred, division, and brutality. But for a small group of German women in a quiet prison camp in the heart of America, the war taught a different, more paradoxical lesson. They learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon is not a bomb or a bullet. Sometimes it is a simple, unexpected act of humanity. A gesture that does not conquer the body, but completely and irrevocably disarms the soul. If this story surprised you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories. And let us know in the comments, what was the most shocking detail for you?